Hello to the listeners of Good Art, Bad Artist. We have a special edition today. A lot of you know that most of my initial guests are visual artists, but my intention in doing this pod is not really just to dwell on visual art, but to talk to people who do well in their different mediums. Today, we speak to a writer, a teacher, and also an activist. Please correct me later, Miss, if that's not a term you would like me to use. But she's someone who whose voice does not end in just writing alone, and that's I think something I admire about her is that she is someone who has taught me through her work that the work is not enough. You really need to act. At least that's a message I get from, admiring and following her from afar. You've probably heard of some of her books. There's Dark Hours, Elsewhere, Held and Lingered, and something me and my friend refer to a lot, which is the line, there is no emergency. It's parang naging inside joke na namin siya ng friend ko that line. She is Chingbee Cruz, or do you prefer Miss Conchitina Cruz?
Oh, please call me Chingbee.
Okay, please say hi to our listeners and tell us a bit more about yourself.
Hello. Thank you, Shin, for having me. And ayun, I'm Chingbee Cruz. I think Shin's pretty much summed up what I do with my life, which is I teach and I write. I feel awkward being referred to as an activist. I think so many other
No,
people are doing uh,
more.
that job. Yeah. Though
Okay.
I try to do what I can to participate. But thank you so much for your kind words about my work. And
All
I'm
right.
curious about the inside joke.
No, it's just parang just it's with austere, austere, right? It's
Yeah, I know
just
us here. Yeah.
sometimes we fill it with something else. Like, there is no dentist appointment, there is no something like that. We like making jokes about something na kaming dalawa lang, I guess, yung nakakagets ng
Sure.
reference. Sometimes I'm like, oh my God, that's very Lydia Davis of you. Like if he's staring out a window or when he's making spaghetti, I'm like, parang such a Haruki Murakami protagonist thing to do. Yung ganon. It's
Nice.
yeah, it's just the two of us. So Chingbi, let's begin right away. There's this question that I ask not to everyone, but to those artists na I'm actually interested in what they will answer. What are some things that you find particularly quote unquote beautiful?
Uh-huh.
Could be something small or something about the grand scheme of things or even just a tiny detail of life.
Sure. Well, the first thing that occurred to me when you asked that is just how I have so much appreciation for the handmade. I mean, I think that's why I really love zines. I find
Mm.
I appreciate handmade objects, and I think that's just because I like the idea of things literally being touched by a person and turned into
Mm.
something that that I appreciate. So I also work with a group called Rural Women Advocates, and many
Mm.
of them are really good with embroidery. And so I just really appreciate seeing something transform, from just from nothing to something, and
Yeah.
I sometimes help out when even the banners they make for mobilizations are embroidered. So sometimes I help out with that, and that feels.
Uh,
I think that also just feels. I do see beauty also in um, collective creativity. Maybe it's also because I'm so solitary when it comes to writing. So when there are other
mm.
things when I can make with other people, I find a lot to appreciate in that.
I forgot to mention that of course you're one of the people who used to organize BLTX to those,
Yeah.
which is super. I'm sure you probably miss it a lot also.
Oh, super. Yeah, yeah. Well, that I mentioned zines, the first thing that I appreciate, just things that are and of course with zines you can do the range from really finely made to just plain and messy, but I just
Hmm.
appreciate the handiwork there. And yeah, sa hirap with COVID, hindi pa namin ma-figure out how to
Hmm.
work. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I do miss PLTX.
To those who are not maybe familiar yet, BLTX is maybe biannual or more than once a year event where artists and writers and collaborative groups, they basically sell mostly Xeroxed or printed material that they create, from chapbooks to short stories to stickers to comics. It's one of those very it's such a social thing that I really found welcoming. It's such a beautiful place to be around, and it's well, I just miss it, as Chingbee said.
Yeah.
I love what you said na for you, ayun, embroidery, oo nga naman. There's so much life embedded into embroidery, no? Kasi it's not just the product, but time, it is
Yeah.
memory, it is history.
Sure.
So, as I said to you in the beginning, you are my first writer guest, no? And
Oh,
so a lot of people are probably thinking, oh my God, poetry, no? I'm sure you're familiar with the perception na, oh, poetry is so hard, or poetry is not for me. I can't do it. I don't know what to do. Like, maybe not even as a teacher, but like as a person,
mhm.
how do you look at poetry or at a poem? How do you start? How do you enjoy it? Just a small,
Yeah.
some tips.
Sure. Well, I think it's true. No, poetry has that reputation, like it's a puzzle you have to solve,
Hmm.
or a mystery you have to crack. And I think some poems are like that, sure, but a lot of poems also are not necessarily. No, I think poetry just really um, it's 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 a kind of it's in poetry that we get to emphasize those aspects of language where there are things that can go beyond what's immediately understandable. There's room for enigma in language, and poetry kind of plays that up. And I think that siguro yan din yung openness to not understanding everything all the
Hmm.
time right away. Parang ganon.
Hmm.
Which
Yeah.
I think I appreciate with poetry, that it's very strangely for me, it's comforting and it's pleasurable not to always just get everything, even just to respond to something um, instinctively, or to respond to something without necessarily being able to explain it away. Um, when I experience poetry that way, I feel rejuvenated somehow. Rather, but
Hmm.
so I think maybe just that openness to uncertainties not necessarily being frustrating or
Yeah. Kasi, ayun nga, I think our initial perception that if it's a poem is parang, oh, what does it mean? Right? Parang, what does it say? What does this symbolize? And I think that's such ano rin, no? It's such a heavy preoccupation talaga with it. Kaya I think a lot of people, me included sometimes, are like threatened by it, or parang, oh no, what do I do with this? Parang this is not my jam. And I just read a few months ago of, Billy Collins' introduction to poetry poem.
Mhm.
Sabi niya parang the problem is that people want to tie poems to a chair with a rope and torture a confession out of it. They beat
Oh.
it with a hose, and generally what we do with it, no? So let's segue to my follow-up question is that if there are listeners to this na, oh, maybe I should try poetry, can you mention top of your head like three poems na for beginners? Like if you would teach high school poetry, what will you show them? Can you give me titles
Oh
and
my.
authors?
Okay, that's tough. It makes me like go back to my childhood. No, I don't know if that's the most advisable thing, but if I'm to go back to, if I may answer that by thinking of or recalling poems that drew me to poetry as a child. Dickinson, definitely for me. Emily Dickinson, really short lyrics, short poems that are abstract yet moving to me. She had these mga, or she has these poems about pain
Mm.
that I really responded. Well, the first poem first that I responded to was that I'm nobody, who are you nobody too? So that made me feel like I was being spoken to. And
Mm.
then William Blake, Tiger, Tiger, Burning Light in the Forests of the Night. Nako, there's so much that's problematic also with my childhood poetry because I was not exposed to. But I do remember just really responding to poems that are very visual and that are short, that sound wise also just made me appreciate patterns of sound. And then a third, oh my, what would be a third poet? Well, if I'm just gonna go with my childhood logic na lang, actually the first Filipino poet I encountered was Jose Garcia Villa. The title was, I don't remember the title, but it went something like God said I made man and something something, and it was like an encounter between God and man. So I kind like I appreciated the kind of interaction in narrative built in there. That then kind of made me see how it's possible to have a scenario in just such a short span of language. I'm afraid maybe that's not particularly helpful, but but I suppose maybe it's less which poems and just the kind of openness that you can have when you encounter a poem where you listen to language and listen to its patterns. It's kind of attentiveness that does entail some openness and just willingness to hear language out.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of openness and willingness, which is, I think, yeah, I mean, really, I get that. Kasi nga, again, there's this idea na a poem is this almost mathematical Rubik's Cube na you have to be able to convert every part of it to something else.
Right. Yeah.
Also,
It's a good way of putting it.
you also mentioned yun nga, parang to respond instinctively na it could just be you and the poem without like, is this what the author meant? Stuff like that.
Mhm.
Si,
Yeah.
si Jose Garcia Villa ba yung may Emperor's New Sonnet? Stuff
Oo,
like that.
siya yun. Tas blank lang, di ba?
Oo. May isa pa siyang pa-clever stuff eh. Parang ganun.
Oo, may mga ganun nga siya. Mga,
Mm-mm.
the bashful one, yung ganun.
Ayun, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Basta, when our professor presented that to us, parang, oh, fun. And he's Filipino. Filipinos do this din pala. Stuff like that. It's so fun. You talked about listening to the language,
Mhm.
paying attention to the patterns. So I want to ask you now, as a person who writes poetry, like in crafting your poems,
Mhm.
which to you, I mean, of course, I'm sure it's a case to case basis, but which generally come first? Like, and how does the first idea inform the others in terms of imagery, sounds, form, intent? Like me, I don't really write
Mhm.
poetry a lot, but when I do, it usually starts with a sentence that sounds cool to me. Like the
Mhm.
imagery is interesting. Like,
Mhm.
how about you? How do you begin generally?
We're kind of the same. For the longest time, I needed a first line that
Mm.
was no longer gonna change. Like I can't get the, uh, I can I can, of course, I'll have to revise. When I write a poem, then I'll have to revise it. But my habit for the longest time was to have a first line that's done. That shouldn't change. And I think that's because the way I was thinking about it too was, I need a first line that sounds good to me, and also is a way into the rest of the poem. Sometimes it's an image, sometimes it's just for more narratively driven, just a place to start the narrative, or sometimes it's just an idea, so the first line becomes like a point of entry or a frame of reference for what else can happen.
I know poets hate this word, but like, how does the message or the meaning take place into that? Do you just keep writing and then, oh, this seems to be about domestic abuse, or is it like after the first few lines, you tell yourself, oh my God, I want to write about the environment? Like, how does the intent of you as a writer enter the process of maybe just composing something that sounds and looks good?
I like thinking in terms of collections, not just individual poems.
I actually wanted to ask that later. Go, sorry.
Okay. Oo, pero I think kasi nga, especially when I was starting out, it was just really like self-expression, like just, sige, I feel like writing, or something inspired me, or something happened to me, so I would write a poem. But then it felt, I didn't know how to direct my creative energies until it came to me that, well, if you envision a bigger space like a collection or a book, then it can help direct, where the poems can go. So my pattern has been, like, let's say I would write a couple of poems, just when the mood hits, or when I'm feeling it. And then when I have a couple, I look at them. I kind of let the poems tell me what I'm up to. Like, okay, what am I thinking about nowadays? And then when I see concerns, recurring in the few poems, like with dark hours of, okay, there's just urban, despair and ennui or something. Just all these kind of isolated characters moving in the same space. Once parang I have a couple of poems and I see common threads, and then that's where I work with that. Na parang, okay, mukhang I'm interested pala in this love triangle. No? So, okay, and then I set up extra things to anchor me. Like, I'm interested in this love drama. So why don't I put in the constraint where it's just 3 rooms that will be the setting of the entire book, And then that helps me imagine more poems, because I'm creating little constraints for the poems to move in. And then I try to make the poems speak to each other. Medyo rin talaga, collection dependent. Like I write poems and then build on them and then add some more, until I can come up with a collection.
Yeah. When you think of singers' albums, where it's an album, right? It's a record of like 12 songs. Na they're all different, pero meron silang mga motif that they share.
Yeah, that's the way to think about it. Yeah.
I love what you said na, ayun nga, eventually, when you write, of course, you cannot contain everything you want to say in one poem. So parang it really grows na, there's another angle to this I can explore.
Exactly, yeah. It's hardest for me when I'm just writing random stuff pa, na parang wala pang direction. But once I see things going on in several poems, then I enjoy building on them.
I think poetry and all kinds of art, it really starts with a spark that you just enjoy. but suddenly it has to become labor at some point, no? Do you feel that way? Na naging trabaho na siya from something na, ay, parang ang saya gumawa ng ganitong setup. Because later on, parang it's almost like you're employed without pay.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm employed with pay. I teach.
Good for you.
I mean, it's no, but I absolutely agree. I mentioned also my work because I'm a teacher of creative writing, and I'm hired because of the poetry that I do. I mean, that's what I'm there for. No, of course I'm grateful for my job, but
Yeah, what
that's
privilege.
also exactly right.
What I mean by that is,
Mhm.
parang you start with this delight of the topic, but you cannot just leave it at that, you know. Parang you have to be, it's like when you suddenly adopt like a cat that looks cute in the pet store or sa
And
bahay
then
ng
you need
friend
to work
mo.
on.
In the beginning, it's just fun, pero later on, parang, oh my God, kailangan kong linisin yung tae niya or whatever.
Sure.
So, like, kasi I'm doing a comic right now. So, alam mo yung, I really enjoy the idea of it. Pero it's like, there are areas that I have to work on that I don't necessarily
Yeah.
enjoy. But anyway, I don't even have a question there. I just want to bring up what makes zines great from what you said na parang
Mhm.
kasi I know for some people it's hard to like sustain a project. But what's good about
Mhm.
zines, and tell me your thoughts na you can just say, "Oh, I will write 6 poems that are all about, let's say, scratches from falling down the stairs or tiny wounds or pimples." And then when you make it into a zine, it
Yeah.
suddenly takes this shape na project na siya na, ayun, it will be a mix na of the delight of it and the labor involved because you want them to be cohesive in a way. Is that how you see zines as well? Or are zines to you very fuck it, whatever?
Oh yeah, but I share your thoughts there. I love zines. I think there's something also about them being, handmade.
Hmm. Against the
And
publication system.
yeah, and also just you can make it yourself. Turning to zines has been also my response to being employed as a poet in a way, because with employment, then there's this, you're so brave and serious about your art, and nawa ko
Same.
wala
Yeah,
akong delight
definitely.
eh. So there's that informality to zines, and also you can just make them on the go. It doesn't have to be complete. On the one hand, it doesn't have to be, it's small. It doesn't have to be this, huge thing. On the other
Yeah.
hand, you do want to create a form out of it. You want to
Yeah.
create a logic and coherence, and you want to put the things together because they go together. Which then you do that for the zine. So that for me is just, it's a way to it's a way to recover that delight, and also not to take it too seriously, and really just go with fun and the energy of it. Yeah, so I find that that's really where I do my stuff na yan. Mas masaya
Mhm.
eh.
The fact na the zine will have a cover, parang yun palang it will be an anchor already in a way, di ba na, okay, ito yung magiging, ano niya, ito yung magiging face of the project. Like, you have this, oh, I forgot the title, pero I think the latest zine of yours I got is yung parang paper doll cutouts yung
Yeah.
cover.
Yeah, the book I'm working on right now, mga pagsama-sama na yun eh. But yes, thank you for remembering that. The collection I'm working on is kind of interested in, this constantly self-fashioning when you're on social
Mhm.
media, So parang you're never not in front of an audience. And
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
like the paper doll thematic, it just I found it an interesting like visual, kasi nga you're parang putting things on, taking things off, and then ang saya gawin lang sa, I think with zines then you can just keep testing ideas out. Well, you make a lot of it too, diba? It's fun.
Yeah.
I think it's so important, the fun part.
Yeah, and ayun nga, parang hindi siya high stakes. Kumbaga, it's not
Yeah,
like you have a book deal with it. And if and
exactly.
if you realize na, ay, hindi mo pala siya gusto, parang, di hindi ko na ipiprint ulit, di ba?
So, we move on, di ba? Pero
Mm-mm. And,
na-try mo, nalabas
yeah.
mo.
And ayun nga, like coming from you, seeing you na you have this zine na very bond paper print, na ginupit lang siya. Like for us, for other people, it reminds us na parang, oh, everyone can really do it, you know, and it's not like you don't make zines anymore because you're a teacher now or whatever. So, and by the way, just for those who are maybe not into zines yet, not to be mansplaining, but zines are basically a printed collection of whatever you've done, like at work that you've accumulated for quite some time. Like I had zines na sketchbook drawings lang na pinaserox. So walang ano at all, walang anchoring motive at all. Like I really suggest no that more people would. You know what? Zines
No,
are not in my notes, but it's persistent in this conversation so far. Yes.
and I got to know your work through your zines. Yeah, through
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
books.
yeah.
Yeah, it's so much fun.
It's zines are like one of the like fucking best art forms. I mean, paintings are to one place only. You know what I mean? But zines are like to me is like one of the best things literally ever. Let's go back to your writing process. When you check your own work, of course, visual artists, mas madaling mag-confirm na, yung shading, yung background, yung proportion ng mata, di ba? It's easy for artists that way. What questions or points of focus do you pay attention to, like when you write? Do you do this thing where you have to read it like 200 times orally? What are your mga parang internal checklist of ano yung mahahalagang aspects sa'yo in particular?
I've changed over time. I used to be so careful. Kailangan first line na beyond revision na. And then from there, wanting everything to add up, wanting it to be clean. Relying on some readers also to tell me what they think, like trusted friends and readers to help me through the draft. But I've found over time, getting older, just becoming more relaxed with writing also. I think I needed to shed that baggage or that pressure I was putting on poetry na kailangan every poem perfect, diba? Or just super ayos, everything in place.
Concise.
Oh, exactly. No, clean, concise, precise, and profound. Even that. Parang hirap naman maging profound all the time, no? So I learned to relax and just enjoy and just treat a poem as an opportunity to play with language and not it doesn't have to be perfect. Things don't need to add up. The fun lang din in letting the words move about and letting your imagination. So now, because I'm attached to collection thinking, once I start thinking of the collection, medyo then I rein myself in and kind of like ayoko naman na parang wala ako na lang na nag-enjoy so
syempre.
Then but I do let myself just enjoy first, and then when I sit down to look at the collection, siguro yun yung sinasabi mong labor din, di ba na?
I was gonna say na that's what I meant kanina.
Oo, di ba na yung parang I am a lover of first drafts. Like I can write hundreds of first drafts of things because I just enjoy concocting, di ba? Parang gawa ka ng gawaan ko ano. Yung revision is such a chore to me talaga na because parang now I have to account for things. That's why I end up writing really slowly then because I'd rather come up with first drafts than revise, which but when I get around to it, it's usually when I try to shape it into a collection or a book. Then those things I mentioned earlier about figuring out how they're talking to each other and making certain patterns emerge.
I love what you said about you prefer, like you enjoy the process of drafting kasi with you and other artists, parang there's the inclination na you started this draft, you better finish it. So are you saying medyo against that point of view in making art?
Well, hindi naman against. Dati I used to be that. Talagang parang make it work.
Kailangan matapos siya.
Exactly. Kung you started it na make something out of it. And then syempre yung sayang lang din. Parang sayang lang. Hindi ko mapama.
parang naka 3 hours ka na doon, naka isang araw ka na doon, tapos sayang pag inano mo
Sayang
pa.
naman, di ba? O, ngayon hindi na ako masyado nasasayangan.
Mm.
Well, siguro I'm just looser with it. Na it can be clunkier and it's fine, or it can be mababaw lang. And in the stuff I'm working on now, parang trying to inject some humor into things, no, just more jokey about things, no, and that's had an effect even on the writing process. Na mabilis lang mag-let go kung parang di naman nag-work. Tapos,
I actually noticed that in your latest paper doll concept zine na ang
yeah.
scene, I mean, from what we would know of Chingbee, like, I mean, sa content ng elsewhere, ng, yung latest mong zine, parang sobrang, it's a poem in a way.
Yeah.
Tell me if you disagree, pero my impression of it was, it's really, this is like, this is parang Chingbee na maybe calmer or less experimental in a way, which is what people kind of know you from. Parang
Yeah.
medyo, siya, parang, tama ba ako to observe that?
Yeah, yung the new stuff din kasi I've been so busy with work, so it's always getting in the way of everything, Pero it then made me think as a way to write. Okay, my constraint now is just I want to write all small poems. It's marami. And so even the notebooks I used, I switched to smaller notebooks para ano lang, yung parang poems should fit that small page naman. Tapos one poem per page, tapos puro maliit lang. And then I'm editing them now para ma-reduce talaga to kind of like 5 to 8 lines lang each. So it triggered initially by just not having time to think. And so wanting, the way to make you feel like you're achieving something is to make the project smaller than so
very practical, no?
Diba? Yeah, and of course I also, well, one of my favorites is Lydia Davis, who's
she's my mom. Like, I look up to her so much.
Yeah, I love that.
Speaking of learning from, I would just like to say na one of my favorite pieces of yours now, the first time I read it, it's one of those poems na you would bookmark or screenshot. Here is a reading of that poem by my friend Darlene Velasco.
Dear City by Chingbee Cruz. Permit us to refresh your memory. What comes from heaven is always a blessing. The enemy is not the rain. Rain is the subject of prayer, the kind gesture of saints. Dear City, explain your irreverence. In you, rain is a visitor with nowhere to go. Where is the ground that knows only the love of water? What are the passageways to your heart? Pity the water that stays and rises on the streets. Pity the water that floods into houses, so dark and filthy and heavy with rats and dead leaves and plastic. How ashamed the water is to be what you have made it. What have you done to its beauty, its graceful body in pictures of oceans, its clear face in a glass? We walk home and cannot see our feet in the flood. We forget to thank the gods for their kindness. We look for someone to blame and turn to you, wretched city. Because we are men and women of honor, we feed our children 3 meals a day. We never miss an election. The only explanation is you, dear city. This is the end of our discussion. There is no other culprit.
Dear City is a poem na, well, addressing weather, addressing rain, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, it's about how parang it floods easy in the country, and the water has nowhere to go, and the rain is supposed to be a blessing. In our situation, it almost feels like a curse kasi nga the waterways are medyo fucked up, ganyan.
Yeah, it's a short piece, and yeah, it's an address to the city and its miseries. No?
Ayun, I like showing that to students na kasi nga I think it's fun to read, it's fun to talk about. I mean, it has enough imagery and it has enough ambiguity then for questions to appear. And so I got curious now, when you're composing prose or poems, you had this interview with Nina as well about lyric poetry being political, di ba?
Oh yeah.
Na,
Mhm.
is there careful decision making for you na because you want a certain topic to be raised, you want a certain kind of point of view to be said. Is there a specific decision making in what do I obscure, what do I design, what do I decorate, ano yung bibihisan ko ng imagery, at ano yung I will display as it is, as raw as it is. Kasi nga, yung Dear City, may direktang mentions ng ito yung sitwasyon. At the same time, you're personifying the city and the rain. So, may ganun ka bang decision making na, I'll make this obvious. I will make this metaphor-ish.
Not really. It's hard, you know, kasi I teach poetry, and when you teach, it's like you're accounting for everything, and so
Mm-mm.
kind of like there's an explanation for everything. But when I think about writing, or my own writing, a lot of it is really instinctive, eh, no? And
Mhm.
I mean, there are benefits to being very conscious of how you're writing, why you're writing, no? And how you're doing what, no?
Mhm.
Though I do find that I for most of the writing time, I'd rather not think too hard. It was definitely when I revise, then if I'm seeing, then I my the logical part of me kicks in, no? And I think, oh, you have this image, then you pair it with a couple of others, and it builds that world in the poem. So, you know, then you get more and more calculated with certain things.
Mhm.
But for the most part, I tend to sulat kutob, eh, no? Sometimes, minsan when there are certain shapes I'm after, or like, yeah, I mean, like earlier stuff, I would think of things like, I want to do footnotes. Like, what would those look like? No? And so it's like you're looking at the page and positioning. So parang may visual component din siya. Na parang if I want to position my text here, then there it creates a limit to what will, if I want to make my text footnotes, then there are things we do with footnotes na yun yung magiging limitation kung ano yung papaandar ko doon. So sometimes I think in those terms, but mostly not helpful at all. Mostly I try not to think too hard when I write.
Wow. Guys, you heard it here first. Chingbee doesn't think about what she writes. I don't know why you keep enrolling in her workshops given this statement. Joke lang, of course. Ayun nga, actually, while you're talking, I made a note. Parang, do you ever, kasi ako as an artist who will draw, di ba? There would be, a social issue, a social concern. And here's my take on it. And how do I make this into a visual experience? How do I make this into, a symbol or an icon of something? Are you saying you don't necessarily operate that way?
Not in poetry, no.
Wow.
I find, it's not the medium for me to do those things. I mean, maybe things come out of the poems that are useful, but not because I set out to make them that. I find kunyari with mga engagement with issues, mas madali sa akin magsulat na ng essay, or salita na lang, direct na lang, no? But poetry, and I see it as, maybe it's a limitation na rin on how I came to poetry, and like was raised writing poetry na medyo hindi, it's not where I do those things really.
I love that.
And then I just think it's okay. I still love poetry anyway. And I still love the things I can do with it that are kind of fun and not particularly valuable. But, those things matter too.
So I love that. And I actually respect that about you na. You're not using poetry as an excuse to not make action anymore. Because I think we have this traditional self-grandizing illusion na I'm making art. This is my contribution. And with your writings, I kind of thought about that na din na parang okay, I would make art, but I have to start a charitable drive. I have to it should not end with just me fucking drawing, which is sorry, I'm making this about me, but I learned this from you kasi. I learned this from you na parang ayun nga, I can't just congratulate myself na, oh, social issue comics. I actually stopped. Hindi na kasing frequent nung dati na people started seeing me as this, oh, socio-political comic artist. And I didn't, the way I see you is, okay, you love poetry and you're a poet, of course, but you're not, ayun nga, that's not the end of it. We will go back to that later. Speaking of my comics, there's a comic strip I made a while ago na kind of inspired by Dear City. I don't know if you've seen it. Can I screen share it to you and tell me what you think?
Yeah.
Okay, wait lang. Ito siya. And by the way, baka magalit ka kasi nga I'm claiming this is inspired by you. So this is a 4-panel comic strip na nung nagbagyo recently.
Yeah.
I mean, I try to make it my own voice and everything, but I feel like I wouldn't have thought of this if I haven't read that piece of yours.
Oh my. Well, I wouldn't have thought that I contributed in any way to this. This is great. Thank you for sharing it with me.
Yeah, wala lang. Sorry. It's just me being a fangirl right now.
Oh.
Can you maybe share with us a quick process of how you start from an idea of a poem to the final piece? I just want to know, kind of a look into the process if possible.
I'm working on, let me see, hang on.
Sige, OMG.
I have categories that I think are section titles. So my first category is Lose and Love.
Interesting.
And then the second category is Siesta. And then I'll just show the first three. And then the third is Cautionary Tale. And then I have...
the titles seem disconnected. Like, I don't see the motive so far.
And then, because mostly the poems are small, diba? Like, this is the general size of the poem. Medyo ganyan siya.
Mga less than 10 lines mostly.
Oo, panay less than 10 lines. And then, the way I did it, because I printed it and then cut them up. And then I have like, I think 20 categories. And then I'm just jumbling like where they would go to help me see an arc in
of course.
The collection. No? But I don't, medyo iba yung naging process kasi dito because I was doing the one poem per small page a day. Well, I was doing 3 poems a day. And then when I printed it all out, I would even like migrate lines from other drafts, make them move to other poems. That kind of medyo collage-y, ano siya, collage process, where they're not so parang unbreakable, parang modular pieces, parang bricks yung lines na move ko around. So yeah, that's not so helpful. But anyway,
that's the working title, Modus, or is that just for you to name it right now?
It's the title of the book. It's Modus. Yeah. And then the cover is already the cover. Ev is the cover.
Oh wow! I just interviewed her like 2 days ago.
Oh, did you? Yeah. Because she has this paper doll line, or like.
Oh yeah, I was actually thinking Ev, you kind of played with a paper doll concept then a while ago. For the final question of the show, I ask the guests what makes good art and what makes a bad artist. But in this case, I want to recall first is this your dissertation called The Miseducation of the Filipino Writer? Is it a thesis?
Yeah, that's part of my dissertation.
Can you give us I mean, sorry for making you do this. Can you give us like a summary of like the abstract? Wow, very JSTOR of us. No, this is the JSTOR podcast. But can you give us an abstract of what you wanted to do there? What was your point? And maybe, if possible, can you connect it to the question, what makes good art? What is a bad artist?
All right. Well, I'll try. I'll try.
Hey,
The Miseducation of the Filipino Writer is actually a chapter from my dissertation, which looks at the politics of art for art's sake. So rather than thinking of aesthetics and politics as separate, which has become a way of thinking, then that dissertation was interested in seeing the politics in or off, no? Seeing the politics in or off variants of aesthetic autonomy. And I think yung Miseducation is just one chapter, pero parang it touched the nerve, I suppose, because it's about workshop, no? Which is how we are taught how we are taught here, or in many places actually, the workshop method for when it comes to creative writing. And I revised that chapter, and it became an article in a journal, kind of examine creative writing education in the Philippines by way of the Siliman workshop, which when you basically when you historicize it, then you can see how a particular institution, when you look at its history, when you see its connection also to the history of colonization, and how that history impacts also how we are taught to be artists, and how we write.
Mhm.
And if you treat craft, in our case craft, kasi minsan we think of it as neutral and technical. That's a myth, that the article tried to shatter, because you have to see also craft, like anything, as constructed and contextualized. If you treat it as outside of history, outside of politics, then lalong there's a risk where it can be a vessel for, at least I argue there, like colonialist and classist ideas. But to connect now to the question of, I think, rather than ask, is it good art? I think it's useful to ask, what is the art good for?
Wow. Okay.
Parang kasi it's a difference between when you say, is it good? Parang there's already a fixed concept of good, and then do you meet that standard?
Okay.
Versus, let's say, thinking about how there are different different traditions of art, and then there are different ways of making art. So it even doon pa lang, you can't ask a fabulist to be a realist. Parang, depende kung saan ka nagmumula. What good can it do for us? And it becomes less a question of parang perfect ba siya, or flawless ba siya. And it makes clear na parang anong conversation ba yung pinapasok niya, tapos ano yung napo-contribute niya sa conversation na yun. Parang in that way, it also lessens the pressure on art to be to be everything all at once. And,
yeah.
but to attend to the specific things, or the specific conversation, the specific concern that the artist wishes to attend to. So siguro yun. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I need to, first of all, I want to highlight that you said, I just want to reiterate, you said instead of asking what is good art, it's a good question to ask, what is the art good for? I fucking love that. And so to our listeners, basically, Chingbee said the podcast is trash and that we are doing it wrong. joke. No, I'm kidding. No, but I want to return that question to you. You write poems as well. So your poems, what would you say are they good for?
Not much, really.
Okay.
I mean,
Like,
yeah. That's also why I don't take my work that seriously. I mean,
mm-mm,
definitely there's
mm-mm.
value in delight, and then there's value in just messing with the imagination, and there's value in, I write about love, I write about city, I write about
Yeah.
the poems are very social din naman, of course, but they're very social, and then they're also poems. I suppose it's parang yung binanggit mo nga rin, wanting poems to do something, but then also not like overstating what they can do, or not also making them
Yeah.
forcing them to do what really they cannot do. No, I have no delusions about poetry. At least the poetry that I write, no delusions
Yeah.
about why they would matter all that much. Even my decision to just make and produce my own stuff, that's also
Uh-huh.
attached to, I don't see any reason why other people need to invest and deal with my stuff. I'll just make it myself. No?
Lalo na ngayon, there's
Mhm.
a lot of political commentary. I mean, there's always been political art, but parang it really made me think a few months ago na parang, wait, parang this is not it. This is the smallest thing pa lang. And this is, the art is not the end of the fight. It's not even the beginning. It's just a tiny, tiny curly cue in the struggle and in the what we're revolting against. Do you feel that way?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's we need to multitask. I mean,
Mm,
I feel very strongly about doing art all the time. I think that's important. No.
mm,
But
mm.
I also feel very strongly about not just doing art. Just the need
Oo.
to do multiple things simultaneously, and that way also, then it also takes yun nga, parang hindi mo kaya pressure yung art na gawin lahat yan.
Mhm.
So there are other things to do, and as a person, you can do, you know multiple things simultaneously.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's pretty much it for the questions. I think you have projects and plans that maybe you can mention to our listeners.
Yeah, well, my partner and I are launching a small press in March. We're starting with our stuff and our some
Mm-mm.
stuff by our friends to help to help get it started. No? And then we're
Mm-mm.
gonna seek other manuscripts. But the first set of books that we'll do a reprint actually of Dark Hours. So
Yay, OMG. I only have the PDF from your Twitter.
oh,
Nahirapan pa akong i-search actually.
Oo nga, nandun yun. Oo, yeah, it's online naman, Dark Hour.
Promote na rin natin.
Yeah, those are online. But then if you like having a hard copy, we're publishing some books that are out of print, Dark Hours included. Poetry books, no, You Are Here by Mavi David, and then El Vivo Variations by Adam David. And then my new book, and then creative nonfiction by Glenn Diaz, and
Yun din,
poetry book
sobrang
by
exciting.
No, oo. Tapos yung huli, yung bagong libro ng Tula ni Faye Cura. So yeah, it's mostly poetry actually. But I'm just excited to be able to put out stuff in the world. Kahit na it's a very small scale
Mm.
operation, but we'll do that in March. So I hope people look out for the books.
What's the name again of the project publishing
It's called
group?
Paper Trail Projects.
Paper Trail.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.